The ballroom shimmered in gold light, crystal chandeliers casting diamonds across, pressed tuxedos and silk gowns. A string quartet played something soft and expensive near the marble staircase, and waiters floated by with silver trays as if rehearsed for royalty. Outside, imported cars lined the circular drive, sleek, polished, whispering status without saying a word. Then it came, low, sharp, meant to be private. I didn't realize we were inviting the help. The groom's mother didn't raise her voice, but she didn't lower it enough either. A few nearby guests stiffened. One or two hid their smiles behind champagne flutes. Across the room stood the bride's father. His suit was clean but older, tailored years ago when shoulders were broader and money was tighter. He adjusted a pair of worn silver cufflinks, the metal slightly dulled with time. His pickup truck faded red, engine ticking as it cooled, sat at the edge of a line of European engines worth more than his first house. He had heard the whisper. Of course he had. But he only straightened his jacket and kept his eyes steady. And what they didn't know would stop the entire wedding cold. Long before chandeliers and string quartets, his world smelled like motor oil and hot metal. He started as a mechanic at 19, sweeping floors before anyone trusted him with an engine. By 30, he'd opened a narrow two-bay shop on the edge of town with a hand-painted sign and a loan that kept him awake at night. 16-hour days were normal. Winter mornings meant frozen fingers. Summer afternoons meant sweat soaking through denim. He fixed what other people threw away. When his daughter was born, he added a crib to the tiny office in the back. Some nights she fell asleep to the rhythm of impact wrenches and the low murmur of her father, promising customers he'd make it right. Private school tuition wasn't practical. It wasn't easy. But he paid it anyway, one repaired transmission at a time. Vacations became rumors. New clothes could wait. College savings could not. He still drove the same pickup he bought used 20 years ago. It still runs, he'd say with a shrug, as if that explained everything. The cufflinks he wore tonight were older than the shop. His wife gave them to him when business was barely surviving, wrapped in newspaper because gift boxes cost extra. So you remember who you are, she told him. His hands were rough, knuckles thick from years of torque and steel, but his heart was steady. The groom's family had built a reputation long before this wedding invitation was printed in gold leaf. Their names sat on hospital wings and scholarship plaques. They chaired country club boards and hosted fundraisers where conversations drifted easily between golf handicaps and international markets. Wealth, in their world, wasn't discussed loudly, it was assumed. Clusters of relatives gathered beneath the chandeliers, comparing portfolios the way other families compared recipes. Words like equity, trust, and legacy floated through the air. Someone mentioned how thorough they'd been with background checks when their son started dating serious. It was said lightly, but not kindly, near the bar. The groom's uncle adjusted his cuff and smirked. Well, he said, nodding discreetly toward the bride's father across the room, at least love is blind. A few people chuckled. The bride heard it. She stood frozen for half a breath too long, bouquet trembling slightly in her hands. Her eyes searched for her fiancé. He leaned close and whispered, "Let's not start anything today, it's just nerves." Ignore it, as if dignity were a small thing, as if respect were optional. Across the room, her father stood alone, and the distance between two families suddenly felt much wider than the aisle they were about to walk. The rehearsal dinner had been billed as intimate. In truth, it felt curated. Place cards in looping script guided guests to tables near the head of the room, close to the speeches, close to the spotlight. The bride's father found his name near the back, beside the swinging doors that led to the kitchen. Every time a server pushed through, the scent of garlic and butter rushed over him, followed by the clatter of plates. He didn't complain. He simply pulled out his chair and sat down. Midway through the first course, a young caterer tapped his shoulder. "Sir, we're fully staffed tonight. If you check with the event manager, they'll get you a uniform." A pause. "I'm a guest," he said gently. Color rose in the server's face as apologies tumbled out. A few nearby relatives pretended not to notice. Later, near the entrance, the groom's mother approached him with a thin smile. "Oh, have you found the valet? I know these venues can be confusing." He met her eyes evenly. "No, Mom, I parked just fine. Not sharp, not defensive, just steady." But steady can feel louder than shouting. A few guests exchanged glances. The bride saw it all, her jaw tightening. After dessert, he stepped outside into the cooling evening air. The noise of laughter dulled behind closed doors. He took out his phone and made a quiet call. We never hear what he says. Only that when he hangs up, his expression hasn't changed. She found him near the side entrance, where the night air felt cleaner than the ballroom. "Dad." He turned, already smiling the way he always did when he saw her, as if the world made sense again. But she wasn't smiling. "Why do you let them treat you like this?" Her voice cracked despite her effort to steady it. "They talk about you like you don't belong here, like you're less." For a moment, the sounds of clinking glasses and distant laughter drifted through the walls behind them. He studied her face. The same face he once wiped tears from after middle school bullies. The same eyes that had watched him lock up the shop at midnight. "Baby," he said softly, "a man doesn't prove his worth by arguing with fools." She shook her head. "It's not right." "No," he agreed. "It isn't." There was something in his eyes then, not hurt exactly, not anger either. Something measured, patient, like a man who knew a chapter she hadn't read yet. He squeezed her hand. "Tomorrow is about you. Let me handle the rest." She searched his face, but he offered nothing more. By morning, the sun rose bright over polished marble and trimmed hedges. Wedding day had arrived. By late afternoon, every seat was filled. Programs rested neatly on polished wood chairs. The string quartet shifted from tuning to something soft and anticipatory. At the altar, the officiant clasped his hands and smiled at familiar faces. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, catching diamonds at throats and wrists. The groom stood straight, jaw set, waiting for the doors to open. Then the music faltered. At first it was subtle, a low vibration beneath the floor, almost mistaken for distant thunder. But the sky outside was clear blue. The sound grew louder, deep, controlled, mechanical precision. Heads turned toward the entrance. Through the tall glass windows, a long black hood eased into view. A Rolls-Royce. It stopped at the curb with silent authority. Before whispers could settle, a second one followed, then a third. Guests began to rise from their seats, craning their necks. 4, 5, 6. Valet stood frozen near the drive, unsure whether to move or salute. 7, 8. By the ninth Rolls-Royce, perfectly aligned behind the others, like a ceremonial procession, phones were lifted high. Conversations dissolved into stunned silence. No one laughed now. No one whispered. 9 identical vehicles, gleaming beneath the afternoon sun, idled in synchronized stillness. And that's when everyone realized this wasn't a coincidence. The engines went silent in unison, one by one. Uniformed chauffeurs stepped out, caps straight, gloves crisp, movements precise. They didn't look around for direction. They already knew where they were headed. Behind them emerged familiar faces, men and women, recognized from charity galas, city council meetings, hospital boards. A former mayor, the director of a regional children's foundation, a CEO whose name had appeared in business journals for years. Guests began murmuring again, but this time with confusion. The small procession walked past the groom, past his stunned relatives, straight down the center aisle, and stopped in front of the bride's father. For a heartbeat, no one breathed. Then one of the executives stepped forward, extending his hand with visible respect. "Sir," he said clearly, his voice carrying through the quiet room, "the fleet is ready, just like you asked." The words landed heavier than any insult ever had. The director of the Children's Foundation smiled warmly. "We wouldn't have missed this for anything, after everything you've done for our scholarship families." Another added, "And the hospital transport program. We're still expanding because of you." Understanding moved through the room like a slow wave. Years ago, after his auto shop had grown steady and profitable, He invested in something different, a small luxury car service. One vehicle became three. Three became a regional fleet. Corporate contracts followed, so did quiet partnerships. When children needed rides to treatment across state lines, his company provided them no charge. When scholarship recipients couldn't afford campus visits, a driver showed up anyway. He funded it privately, requesting no press releases, no plaques. He never mentioned it. Not once. He simply kept driving his old truck. Now 9 Rolls-Royces stood outside in perfect formation, not as decoration but as testimony. Across the aisle, the groom's mother stared, her expression stripped of certainty. For the first time that weekend, she had nothing to say. The shift was almost physical. Where space had once opened around him, people now stepped closer, hands extended, voices warm, eyes newly respectful. Conversations changed tone mid-sentence, laughter softened. Postures straightened. The groom's uncle, the same man who had joked about love being blind, approached with a careful smile. "I had no idea," he said, clearing his throat. "Perhaps we should talk sometime. There might be investment opportunities." The father regarded him calmly, not unkindly. "I'm only interested in investing in people," he replied. "No edge, no triumph. Just truth." The uncle nodded, unsure how to respond. Across the room, the bride stood very still. Tears shimmered, but didn't fall. She wasn't crying because of the cars. She was crying because the man who had fixed engines with grease-stained hands, who had sat near kitchen doors without complaint, was now being seen, not for what he drove, but for who he had always been. And in that quiet reversal, the room understood the difference between money and wealth. When the doors finally opened again, it wasn't to the sound of gossip. It was to the soft click of a chauffeur stepping back and the gentle sweep of a Rolls-Royce door being held open. He stepped out first, offering his hand, not because he needed spectacle, not because he needed to prove anything, but because the moment had already spoken for itself. His daughter emerged beside him, radiant in white, her fingers wrapped around his steady palm. The car behind them gleamed under the afternoon sun, but it no longer felt like the headline. It felt like punctuation. They walked toward the entrance together. Inside, every guest stood, not instructed, not prompted, just standing. The string quartet began again, quieter this time, almost reverent. As they reached the aisle, he leaned slightly toward her. His voice was low, meant only for her ears. "Remember who you are, not remember what you have, not remember what they think. Remember who you are." Her shoulders squared gently. Her steps slowed, then steadied. And as father and daughter walked forward, the silence in that room wasn't heavy anymore. It was respectful. Justice hadn't come with shouting. It had come with dignity restored. By the time the vows were spoken, the room felt different, not because of the cars parked outside, not because of titles or business cards exchanged in hushed tones, but because something invisible had been corrected. True wealth had revealed itself. It wasn't the kind that demanded attention or arrived with a press release. It was the kind built slowly through sacrifice, through long nights, through promises kept when no one was watching. As he stood beside his daughter, the chandelier light caught his cufflinks, the small silver edges glinting softly. A gift from years when there had been nothing extra to give, a reminder of who he had always been. Wealth whispers. Character roars when tested. And in a room once quick to judge a faded truck and a modest suit, everyone had learned the same quiet lesson. Never measure a man by appearances. Long after the music faded, and the guests returned to their comfortable assumptions, one truth lingered in that ballroom. It's easy to measure a person by the shine of their shoes, the logo on their car, the smoothness of their hands. It's harder to see the years behind those hands. The sacrifices, the prayers whispered over sleeping children, the quiet decisions to build something lasting instead of something flashy. Have you ever seen someone underestimated, only to watch them rise? Have you ever been that person? Moments like this remind us that dignity doesn't beg for attention, it waits, and when the time is right, it stands on its own. So tell me, what would you have done in that room? Would you have spoken up, stayed silent, looked away? If you believe dignity always deserves its day, stay with us for more stories that remind us what truly matters. Because in the end, character is the only legacy that truly lasts.